You wake to darkness and the smell of wet earth. Someone is shaking your shoulder, and for a moment, just a moment, you cannot remember where you are. Then it comes back. The foxhole, the cold, the war, your shift. This is not a story about D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge. There will be no famous generals, no pivotal moments that change the course of history. This is something different, something quieter, something that in its own way matters more. This is the story of an ordinary day. 24 hours in the life of a soldier whose name you will never know, whose face appears in no history books, whose survival depended on nothing more than luck, endurance, and the men beside him. Tonight we step into his muddy boots. It is late 1904 or perhaps early 1945. The war has been grinding on for years. You are 19 years old, maybe 20. 2 years ago, you worked at a grocery store or sat in a college classroom. Now you live in a hole in the ground. You eat food from cans. You have not had a real bath in 4 months. You cannot remember the last time you felt truly warm. Of the 16 million Americans who served in World War II, fewer than 1 million saw serious combat. The infantry, the men who fought on the ground face to face with the enemy, represented just 14% of all troops. Yet these men, these few, bore 70% of all casualties. 7 out of every 10 infantrymen were killed or wounded. The statistics are cold, clinical. They tell you that if you serve in a rifle company, you have roughly a 50% chance of being hit. They tell you that the average officer's position had to be refilled 9 times over the course of the war. They tell you that in some units, casualties exceeded 600% when you count replacements. But statistics cannot tell you what a day actually felt like. They cannot explain how you endured. They cannot capture the texture of existence when every hour might be your last, when boredom and terror become so intertwined that you can barely tell them apart. So we will not speak in statistics tonight. We will speak in moments, in sensations, in the small, mundane details that made up the days. Because this is what war really was for most soldiers. Not the dramatic charges you see in films, but the endless stretches of waiting. The cold, the hunger, the fear that became so constant it felt almost like normalcy. Over the next hour, we will walk through a complete day, from darkness before dawn through the next long night. We will explore what you ate, where you slept, what you thought about. We will follow you through your routines, your duties, your moments of terror and tedium. And perhaps by the end, you will understand something that cannot be found in any history book. What it truly meant to be young and frightened and alive in those long days of 1944 and 1945. Over the next hour or so, we will walk through a complete day, from the darkest hours before dawn through the next long night. We will explore what you ate, where you slept, what you thought about, what you feared. We will visit both the European theater and the Pacific, understanding how climate, terrain, and enemy shaped the daily rhythms of combat. We will examine your equipment piece by piece, understanding how each item became either a burden or a lifeline. And we will try to understand something that perhaps cannot fully be understood by anyone who was not there. What it felt like to be young and frightened and determined and bored and alive all at the same time in those long days of 1904 and 1945. The day we are about to experience is, in many ways, a typical day. There is no major battle, No dramatic moment that will appear in history books. This is simply a day of existence, of endurance, of small discomforts and smaller victories. It is the day that thousands of soldiers experienced thousands of times. The fundamental texture of war that lies beneath the grand strategies and famous battles. It is the day that most veterans remembered most clearly years later, when the specifics of combat had blurred, but the memory of cold, wet feet and the taste of K-ration coffee remained sharp and immediate. Pre-dawn hours, 4 o'clock a.m., 6 a.m. You wake because someone is shaking your shoulder. It takes a moment to remember where you are. The darkness is absolute, thick and heavy as a blanket. You are lying at the bottom of a foxhole, technically called a defensive fighting position, that you and your buddy dug 2 days ago. The hole is about 4 feet deep and wide enough for 2 men to crouch in, their shoulders nearly touching. You spent hours digging it, first cutting through the topsoil, then hitting harder clay, then loose shale that kept sliding back as you scooped it out with your entrenching tool, a short folding shovel that every infantryman carries. The spoil dirt is piled around the rim, forming a low parapet that gives you a few extra inches of protection. "Your turn," whispers Private Williams. Even in the dark, even half asleep, you know his voice. Williams is from Iowa, a farm boy 2 years older than you. He has a way of falling asleep instantly, anywhere, under any conditions. You envy this ability. Williams climbs out of the hole with practiced care, making sure not to silhouette himself against the slightly lighter sky. The movement brings a cascade of loose dirt down into the foxhole. Everything is damp here, has been damp for weeks. Your uniform is damp, your blanket is damp, your skin feels permanently clammy. The air is cold, perhaps 30 degrees. If you are in Europe, it might be colder. The winter of 1944 to 1945 was one of the harshest on record. American soldiers who trained in the moderate climates of the southern United States found themselves wholly unprepared for the bone-deep cold of a Belgian winter. Many suffered from trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to cold and wet conditions. Your feet swell, the skin goes white and numb, and if left untreated, gangrene can set in. The Army eventually distributed better cold weather gear and water-resistant boots, but many soldiers never received them. You learn to change your socks whenever possible, to take your boots off at night, even though putting cold, damp boots back on frozen feet in the morning is a special kind of torture. If you are in the Pacific, the temperature might be 80 degrees even at this hour, the air thick with moisture. But you are just as wet, drenched with sweat and humidity. The jungle never dries out. Everything rots, everything mildews. Your uniforms develop white patches of fungus. Minor cuts become infected within hours. Mosquitoes swarm in clouds so thick you inhale them. Malaria is a constant threat, deadlier than the Japanese in some campaigns. On Guadalcanal in 1942, disease caused more casualties than enemy action. By 1944, the military began issuing anti-malarial drugs, but they caused their own problems: nausea, dizziness, a bitter taste that lingered for hours. You pull yourself into a sitting position, your back against the rear wall of the foxhole, and try to shake off the fog of sleep. You have been awake for perhaps 15 seconds, and already you need to urinate urgently. This is a problem. You cannot leave your position before stand to, the period just before dawn, when everyone must be alert at their fighting positions in case of attack. Contemporary military doctrine held that enemy forces often launched assaults in the pre-dawn darkness, using the cover of night to approach close before attacking. Historical records indicate that this tactical principle was based on actual German and Japanese attack patterns observed throughout the war. So you will have to wait, or relieve yourself into an empty ration can, trying to be quiet about it. Your M1 Garand rifle leans against the side of the foxhole, wrapped in a piece of cloth to keep the worst of the dirt out of the action. Even so, you will need to clean it again today. Accounts from soldiers consistently mention cleaning their rifles daily, sometimes multiple times a day. General George Patton described the M1 Garand as the greatest battle implement ever devised, a characterization supported by military analysts who note its significant tactical advantage. The M1 is a semi-automatic rifle, meaning you can fire 8 rounds as fast as you can pull the trigger without having to manually work a bolt between shots. Your enemies, whether German or Japanese, mostly carry bolt-action rifles that require manual cycling between each shot. Technical specifications indicate this gave American infantry an enormous advantage in firepower. A skilled rifleman, according to Army field manuals, could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute at ranges up to 300 yards. But the M1 is also finicky. Mud, sand, water, any of these can cause it to malfunction. The rifle feeds ammunition from an en-bloc clip that holds 8 rounds. When the last round is fired, the clip ejects with a distinctive metallic ping sound. Anecdotal accounts among soldiers included claims that enemy troops listened for this ping to know when an American rifle was empty. However, most combat veterans who were later interviewed dismissed this as myth. In the chaos and noise of combat, no one could reliably hear such a subtle sound. Historical evidence suggests that while some American soldiers worried about this tactical vulnerability, former German soldiers interviewed after the war indicated the sound was generally inaudible during actual engagements and not particularly useful when heard, since other squad members were typically nearby ready to fire. Based on the acoustic realities of battlefield conditions, with artillery explosions, small arms fire, and the general cacophony of combat, it seems unlikely any significant number of American servicemen were killed as a result of this sound, though wartime concerns about it were understandable. You check your rifle by feel in the darkness, running your fingers over the smooth walnut stock, the cold metal of the barrel. Everything seems in order. Your ammunition belt, strapped around your waist, holds 10 clips, 80 rounds total. In your pockets, you carry 2 more clips. This is your basic load, the minimum amount of ammunition you are expected to carry into combat. Some soldiers carry more, stuffing extra clips into every available pocket. Weight is always a concern, but running out of ammunition is worse. Time passes slowly. You cannot see your watch in the darkness, but you estimate 30 minutes pass, then 45. You can feel the change in the air before you can see it, a subtle shift in the quality of the darkness. The night is no longer absolute. Shapes begin to emerge from the blackness. The the rim of your foxhole, the bulk of your equipment, the silhouette of trees against the sky. Stand to begins without any verbal command. Everyone knows the drill. Up and down the line, soldiers ease themselves into firing positions, rifles at the ready, eyes scanning the gradually brightening landscape. If an attack is coming, it will come now. Your platoon sergeant, Sergeant Morrison, moves along the line in a crouch, checking each position. He moves with the economy of motion that comes from months of experience. Morrison is 24, ancient by infantry standards, and he has been with the unit since North Africa. Men like Morrison are invaluable, repositories of hard-won knowledge about how to stay alive. "Stay alert," Morrison whispers as he passes your position. "Anything moves, you report it. Don't shoot unless I give the word." This is standard procedure. Nervous soldiers firing at shadows can trigger a firefight with your own troops. Better to watch, to wait, to be sure. The minutes tick by. The world continues to brighten. Birds begin to sing, absurdly cheerful, given the circumstances. A crow caws somewhere to your left. In the Pacific, the dawn chorus is different. Strange whooping calls, clicking sounds, the screech of parrots. But the effect is the same. A reminder that the natural world continues regardless of human affairs. Nothing happens. No attack materializes out of the gloom. This is both a relief and, in a strange way, a disappointment. The tension of stand to is exhausting, every sense straining for signs of danger. When nothing happens, there is a sense of anticlimax, of wound-up energy with nowhere to go. As full light arrives, around 6 o'clock, stand to ends. Word passes down the line to stand down, and soldiers begin to relax, though no one ever fully relaxes at the front. Some light cigarettes, cupping their hands around the flame, even though smoking in daylight poses less risk than at night, when a lit cigarette can be spotted from hundreds of yards away. Others begin the laborious process of bailing water from their foxholes. If it rained during the night, and it almost always rained in the European winter, your foxhole has several inches of muddy water in the bottom. You have been sitting in this water for 2 hours. Your trousers are soaked from the knees down, and your feet have gone numb inside your boots. Dawn, 6 a.m., 8 o'clock a.m. With stand to over, the day officially begins. The first order of business is breakfast, if you can call it that. You pull a K-ration box from your musette bag, the canvas pack that hangs from your web belt. K-rations were originally designed for paratroopers and other mobile forces who needed lightweight, portable meals. According to the development history documented by the Quartermaster Corps, they come in 3 varieties: breakfast, dinner, and supper, each in a small rectangular cardboard box about the size of a thick paperback book. The boxes are waxed to resist moisture, though after a few days in the field, soldier accounts consistently note that the wax coating often cracks and the cardboard turns soggy. The breakfast unit, marked with a brown stripe starting in late 1944, contains a 4-ounce can of ham and eggs, 4 crackers, a compressed fruit bar, a packet of instant coffee, 3 sugar tablets, 4 cigarettes, matches, and a stick of chewing gum. The can has a key soldered to the bottom that you use to peel back the lid in a spiral. Inside is a yellow-gray mass that bears only a passing resemblance to actual eggs. Official taste tests conducted during the war characterized these meals as earning merely palatable and better than nothing ratings from soldiers, but they successfully relieved hunger and provided sufficient energy for basic operations. It is cold, congealed, and has an odd, sweet taste. You eat it anyway, scraping the can clean with one of the crackers. The fruit bar is better, dense and sweet, though it requires serious chewing. The coffee is instant, developed specifically for the military. You mix it with water from your canteen, cold water, since building a fire would give away your position, and drink it down. It tastes like muddy water with a vague coffee flavor, but it contains caffeine, and that is what matters. The cigarettes are usually Camel or Lucky Strike, though sometimes you get Philip Morris or Chesterfield. You do not smoke, never picked up the habit, but cigarettes are valuable currency. You can trade them for almost anything: extra food, writing paper, an hour off guard duty. Some soldiers seem to subsist on cigarettes and coffee, eating only when forced. Others hoard their rations obsessively, creating small stockpiles in their foxholes. A K-ration is supposed to provide approximately 900 calories, though the actual K-ration only provided about 2,800 calories for a full day of 3 meals combined. This is nowhere near enough for a soldier performing hard physical labor in extreme conditions. The Army knew this, but the K-ration was designed as a temporary measure to be eaten for no more than 15 meals before supplementation with fresher food. In practice, soldiers sometimes lived on K-rations and their heavier cousins, C-rations, for weeks at a time. Weight loss was common. On average, combat soldiers lost 10 to 20 pounds during extended campaigns. Some lost much more. Merrill's marauders in Burma, who subsisted primarily on K-rations for 5 months, lost an average of 35 pounds per man. The K-ration has become a joke among the troops. There are endless complaints about the monotony, the odd flavors, the sheer inadequacy of the portions. But it is food, it is reliable, and it requires no preparation. You can eat a K-ration in a muddy foxhole, in the rain, in complete darkness, on the move. This makes it invaluable despite its shortcomings. After eating, you conduct what the Army calls personal hygiene, though in practice this means very little. You cannot shave because shaving requires water you do not have, a mirror you do not have, and time you do not have. Most soldiers in frontline positions go unshaven for weeks, developing scraggly beards that itch and collect dirt. Bathing is equally impossible. In the European theater, some lucky units occasionally got pulled back to towns where the Army set up shower facilities. 4 months might pass between showers. In the Pacific, some soldiers bathed in streams or the ocean when opportunity allowed. But salt water left you sticky, and the streams often harbored parasites, or worse, concealed enemy soldiers. You do, however, tend to your feet. This is not optional. Sergeant Morrison checks everyone's feet during morning inspection. You unlace your boots. The Army issue boots have a dozen eyelets, and your cold fingers fumble with the wet laces and peel off your socks. Your feet are pale, wrinkled, and soft from being wet so long. You dry them as best you can with a relatively dry cloth, then put on a fresh pair of socks from your pack. The wet socks get hung over the edge of your foxhole to dry, though in this weather, they will not dry. Not really. Still, the ritual is important. Clean socks are the difference between functional feet and trench foot. Around 7 o'clock, Sergeant Morrison calls the squad together for morning briefing. Your squad consists of 12 men, though rarely are all 12 present simultaneously. Someone is always on leave, or in the hospital, or has been killed or wounded and not yet replaced. Today, you number 9, including Morrison, you gather in a shallow depression behind the main line, keeping your heads down. Morrison unfolds a map, though in truth there is little new to report. Battalion says the enemy is dug in about 800 yards ahead of us, Morrison explains, pointing to a spot on the map. They tried to probe our lines last night over on the left flank, but 3rd Platoon drove them back. We sit tight today, maintain defensive positions. Working Party is going to improve the trench line connecting the foxholes. 2nd Squad has that duty, so that means us. We start at 0800. Questions? There are no questions. Working parties are a fact of life in infantry units. When you are not fighting, you are digging. You dig fighting positions, communication trenches, latrines, supply dumps, command posts. The earth becomes your protection, your shelter, your fortress. A well-dug position can save your life when artillery starts falling. A poorly dug position will not. Pearson, Miller, you two are on ration detail, Morrison continues. Head back to the supply point, pick up today's rations for the squad. Should be 2 cases of sea rats. If they have bread or hot food, grab that too. Move carefully. Stay in cover. Pearson and Miller nod. The supply point is perhaps half a mile back, but that half mile crosses open ground that is sometimes subject to enemy artillery or sniper fire. Getting supplies forward is a constant challenge. In some sectors, supplies can only move at night. Trucks bring them to forward dumps, then carrying parties of soldiers haul them up to the front lines, bent double under the weight of ammunition boxes and ration crates. In the Pacific, terrain often makes vehicle transport impossible. On jungle-covered mountains like those on New Guinea or Okinawa, everything goes forward on the backs of soldiers, or, when available, mules. Rest of you, clean weapons, check equipment. We start digging at 0800 sharp. Dismissed. The squad disperses. You return to your foxhole and pull out your rifle cleaning kit, a small canvas pouch containing a bore brush, cleaning patches, and a tiny bottle of oil. You have performed this routine so many times you could do it blindfolded. Strip the bolt, run the brush through the barrel, wipe down every surface, apply a thin film of oil to prevent rust, reassemble. The work is soothing in its familiarity. Your hands know what to do without conscious thought, leaving your mind free to wander. Morning, 8 Untuk a.m., 1200 p.m. At 8 o'clock precisely, Sergeant Morrison arrives with shovels and picks. The tools are communal property, shared among the squad. Each man carries his own entrenching tool, a small folding shovel perhaps 18 inches long when extended. But for serious digging, you need larger implements. The picks are heavy, the handles worn smooth by countless hands. The shovels are army green, the blades scarred and dented from hitting rocks. We are going to extend the communication trench from 2nd Squad's position to 3rd Squad's, Morrison explains. That is about 40 yards. We want it 3 feet deep minimum, preferably 4. We want the sides straight, not sloped. We want the dirt piled on the side facing the enemy. You all know the drill. You do indeed know the drill. This is not your first rodeo, as they say. You have dug miles of trenches at this point. You understand the principles. Depth provides protection from shrapnel and small arms fire. Straight sides allow you to move along the trench without exposing yourself. The parapet of spoiled dirt provides an extra layer of protection. You also know that digging in partially frozen ground is back-breaking work, that your hands will blister even through gloves, that by the end of the day, every muscle will ache. The squad lines up along the proposed trench line. Morrison marks it with stakes and white engineer tape. You are assigned a 5-yard section. The soldier to your left is Private Jenkins, a replacement who joined the unit 3 weeks ago and still has that nervous, eager energy that marks the uninitiated. The soldier to your right is Private Rodriguez from Texas, a veteran who has been with the unit almost as long as Morrison. You begin digging. Pick strikes the earth with a satisfying thud. You lever up chunks of frozen dirt, then shovel them out, tossing them onto the parapet. The work is rhythmic, almost meditative. Pick, lever, shovel, toss. Pick, lever, shovel, toss. Your breath comes in white clouds. Sweat begins to trickle down your back despite the cold. An hour passes. You have excavated perhaps 2 feet deep along your 5-yard section. Your hands are throbbing inside your gloves. You pause to rest, leaning on your shovel, and realize that Jenkins has fallen behind. His section is barely a foot deep. Morrison notices too. "Jenkins, pick up the pace," Morrison says, not unkindly. "We all finish together, or we all stay late." Jenkins nods and attacks the earth with renewed vigor, but he lacks technique. He swings the pick too hard, wasting energy. His shovel work is inefficient, scooping too little dirt with each motion. Rodriguez catches your eye and shakes his head slightly. Replacements are always a problem. They do not know the shortcuts, the little tricks that make hard work bearable. More importantly, they have not yet developed the mental toughness required to push through discomfort. In combat, this inexperience can be deadly. By 10 o'clock, the trench is approaching the required depth. You have hit your rhythm now, your body finding the most efficient motions, conserving energy while maintaining steady progress. The physical labor is actually welcome in some ways. It keeps you warm, keeps your mind occupied. Better to be digging than sitting in a foxhole with nothing to do but think and worry. Occasionally, you hear the distant rumble of artillery, explosions somewhere to the north, where another unit is engaged. The sound is like thunder, but flatter, more percussive. Sometimes you see aircraft overhead, usually Allied bombers, headed toward German positions, their contrails white streaks against the gray sky. Once, you hear the distinctive snarl of a German fighter, probably a Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitt, but it does not come close. The air war happens mostly out of sight, high-altitude dogfights and bombing runs that you experience only as distant sounds and rumors. At 10:30, a runner arrives from company headquarters with mail call. This is the highlight of the day, the moment everyone waits for. Letters from home, based on numerous soldier accounts and psychological studies of military morale, served as critical lifelines, connections to a world that seemed increasingly unreal. The runner reads names from a canvas sack, and soldiers step forward to collect their letters. You receive 2 letters, one from your mother and one from a girl you dated back in high school. Research on military correspondence patterns suggests that letters from mothers were universally valued, while romantic relationships often became complicated by the strains of long separation. Your mother's letters follow a predictable pattern observed in millions of wartime correspondences: news from the neighborhood, descriptions of daily domestic life, earnest advice to stay warm and write more often. Historical evidence indicates these letters were simultaneously comforting and painful, serving as reminders of normalcy soldiers had lost. The letter from the girl is more complicated. She writes about her new job at a defense plant, about the dances she attends on Saturday nights, about mutual friends who have married or been drafted. She includes a photograph, a small black and white snapshot of her standing in front of a car, smiling at the camera. She looks impossibly clean, impossibly happy, impossibly far away. You slip the photograph into your helmet, wedged between the steel shell and the liner, where it joins photographs of your parents and your kid sister. You do not read the letters immediately. Instead, you fold them carefully and tuck them into your breast pocket. You will read them tonight, by candlelight if you have a candle, by moonlight if you do not. Reading letters is a private act, a moment of vulnerability you do not want to share with the squad. Some soldiers read their letters aloud, sharing news from home. Others, like you, keep them private. By 11:30, the trench is complete. Morrison inspects it, walking its length and checking the depth at various points with a measuring stick. He nods approval. Good work. Fill canteens from the water cans, then back to your positions. Lunch at noon. The water cans are 5-gallon metal containers stationed at the supply point. The water is treated with purification tablets that leave a chemical taste, vaguely like chlorine, but it is safe to drink. In the Pacific, unsafe water is a major hazard. Drinking from streams can give you dysentery, typhoid, or a dozen other waterborne diseases. The water purification tablets are mandatory, issued with every ration. In Europe, the water supply is generally safer, though still treated as a precaution. You fill your canteen, a 1-quart aluminum bottle covered in canvas, and drink deeply. You have been sweating all morning despite the cold, and you are parched. The water tastes awful, but your body craves it. You drink the whole canteen, refill it, and drink half of that. Dehydration is as much a threat as hunger, perhaps more so. A soldier can function for days on minimal food, but without water, performance degrades rapidly. Midday, 12 p.m., 2 p.m. Lunch is C rations, a welcome change from the K-rations you ate for breakfast. C rations, officially field ration type C, come in cans rather than cardboard boxes. A full C ration consists of 6 12-ounce cans, 2 for each meal, 1 containing the main course, the M unit, and 1 containing bread and dessert, the B unit. The rations are packed in wooden crates, each crate containing 8 complete rations. Pearson and Miller returned from the supply point an hour ago with 2 crates, enough for the squad for today. Morrison distributes the rations, trying to ensure variety. There are several different M unit options: meat and beans, meat and vegetable stew, meat and potato hash, spaghetti in tomato sauce. The B units contain hard crackers, compressed cereal bars, candy, instant coffee, sugar, cigarettes, matches, and toilet paper. Each can has a key soldered to the bottom for opening. You receive a can of meat and beans and a can containing crackers and coffee. The meat and beans are supposed to be better heated, but you have no way to heat them safely in daylight. Some soldiers risk small fires using a trick involving a cut-down ration can filled with dirt and a small amount of gasoline. The gasoline-soaked dirt burns hot enough to heat a can of food in a few minutes, and the small flame is less visible than a wood fire. But Morrison has forbidden fires today. The smoke might give away your position. So you eat the meat and beans cold. They are thick, gelatinous, and taste vaguely of tomato sauce and pork. The texture is unpleasant. The fat has solidified in the cold. But the food is filling. Each can contains about 350 calories, and your body is screaming for calories after a morning of hard labor. You scrape the can clean with a cracker, then eat the remaining crackers dry. They are hard enough to chip teeth and taste like cardboard, but they are food. The coffee is instant, same as breakfast. You mix it with cold water and drink it down, grimacing at the taste. The sugar helps. 3 small tablets that dissolve slowly on your tongue. Some soldiers save their sugar rations, accumulating a store of sweetness for moments when morale is particularly low. After eating, you light one of the cigarettes from the ration. More out of boredom than desire. The tobacco is harsh and strong. You smoke half the cigarette, then stub it out and save the rest for later. Waste not, want not. The afternoon stretches ahead, hours to fill. This is one of the hardest aspects of infantry life, the boredom. Combat is terrifying, but at least it is engaging, demanding your complete attention. The in-between times, the long hours of waiting, are corrosive. Your mind has too much time to think, to worry, to imagine all the ways you might die. Some soldiers write letters. Others play cards using a battered deck that has passed through many hands. Rodriguez produces a harmonica from his pack and plays softly, old folk songs and hymns. The music is strangely beautiful, incongruous in this landscape of mud and cold. After a few songs, Morrison tells him to stop. The sound might carry to enemy positions. You take out the letters from this morning and read them properly. Your mother's letter is dated 3 weeks ago, the delay typical for mail traveling from the United States to the front. She writes about your father's job at the factory, about your sister's school play, about the weather. She mentions that they are praying for you every night, that the whole church is praying for all the boys overseas. This is touching and also faintly embarrassing. You are not particularly religious, though you find yourself praying more often these days, quick, desperate bargains with a God you are not sure you believe in. The letter from the girl is longer, more personal. She writes about missing you, about looking forward to when you come home. She includes some town gossip, stories about people you barely remember. At the end, she writes that she hopes you are staying safe, that you are not taking any unnecessary risks. You wonder what she would think if she knew what staying safe actually means. Crouching in a hole in the ground, eating food from cans, waiting for the next artillery barrage. You write a reply, though you are not sure when it will be mailed. The Army censors all outgoing mail from combat zones. You cannot mention specific locations, unit designations, or operational details. Your letters home are therefore vague and cheerful, full of lies of omission. You write about the weather, about the guys in your squad, about looking forward to coming home. You do not write about the fear, the cold, the exhaustion. What good would that do? It would only worry them, and they can do nothing to help. At 1 o'clock, you hear the sound of engines. 3 trucks are coming up the supply road, 6x6s loaded with ammunition and rations. They park at the supply point, and a working party unloads them rapidly. The trucks do not linger. Sitting still makes them targets. Within 20 minutes, they are gone, heading back down the road. The afternoon passes slowly. You take your turn on watch. 2 hours of staring at the landscape ahead, watching for any sign of movement. This is mind-numbing work, and also essential. Enemy patrols probe the lines constantly, looking for weak points, gathering intelligence. If you fall asleep on watch, people die. Morrison makes this clear to everyone, especially replacements. A soldier caught sleeping on watch faces court-martial. But staying awake is difficult. You are tired, have been tired for weeks, maybe months. Sleep never feels adequate. You develop tricks to stay alert, pinching yourself, doing mental arithmetic, reciting poetry you learned in school. When none of that works, you stand up and do jumping jacks, earning a glare from Morrison for moving so much. Afternoon, 2 p.m., 6 p.m. At 2 o'clock, Sergeant Morrison calls you over. Taking a patrol out, he says, 4 men, you, Rodriguez, Jenkins, and myself. We leave in 10 minutes, check weapons, travel light. A patrol, your stomach tightens into a cold knot. The ham and eggs from breakfast threaten to come back up. Patrols are dangerous, more dangerous than sitting in a foxhole. You will be moving through terrain that might be occupied by the enemy, or mined, or both. You will be exposed, vulnerable, far from the relative safety of your lines. On the other hand, patrols break the monotony, give you a sense of purpose beyond simply existing. And Morrison is good, experienced, the kind of sergeant who brings his men home alive. If you have to go on patrol, you want Morrison leading it. You check your rifle carefully, loading a fresh clip with hands that want to tremble but do not. 8 rounds. 80 rounds total between your belt and your pockets. You adjust your web gear, removing everything unnecessary. Your canteen, first aid kit, and ammunition stay. The extra sweater, the book you have been reading, the spare socks. All go into your pack, which stays behind. To want to move quietly, and extra gear means extra noise, extra weight, extra everything that can go wrong. The patrol moves out at 14-15 hours. Morrison leads, followed by Rodriguez, then Jenkins, then you. You maintain about 10 yards between each man, enough distance that a single grenade or burst of machine gun fire cannot take out the whole patrol. Morrison navigates by map and compass, heading northeast toward a small ridge that overlooks the valley. The terrain is rough, a mix of forest and open ground. You move slowly, carefully, placing each foot deliberately to avoid snapping branches or dislodging stones. Rodriguez is a ghost, moving with near-perfect silence. Jenkins is less skilled, his boots crunching in the frost. Every 20 yards or so, Morrison stops and listens, hand raised for silence. You all freeze, barely breathing, ears straining for any sound that does not belong. The temperature is dropping as the afternoon wears on. Your breath comes in white puffs that could give away your position. You try to breathe through your nose. Slower, warmer, your fingers are numb despite your gloves. You flex them periodically to maintain feeling, but it is a losing battle. After an hour, you reach the ridge. Morrison motions you into a small depression ringed with trees, good cover from observation. From here, you can see down into the valley, several miles of winter landscape. Fields, scattered buildings, bare trees. Somewhere out there are German forces, perhaps a company, perhaps more. Intelligence is uncertain, which is why you are here, to gather information. Morrison produces binoculars and begins scanning systematically, sweeping across the visible terrain. Rodriguez sets up a position covering your rear in case anyone approaches from behind. Jenkins and you watch the flanks. Time passes. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45. Nothing moves. The valley appears empty, though you know it is not. Enemy soldiers are dug in just as you are, invisible in their positions. Then Rodriguez hisses softly. Everyone freezes. He points to the left, perhaps 400 yards away. You follow his gesture and see movement, barely perceptible. Two figures in gray-green uniforms moving between buildings. Germans. Morrison studies them through the binoculars, then makes notes on a small pad. The figures disappear into a barn. Morrison marks the location on his map. You wait longer watching, but see nothing else. At 15:45, Morrison signals to move out. The patrol retraces its route, moving even more carefully than before. Now you know there are enemy troops in the area, possibly patrols like your own. Every shadow might conceal a German soldier. About halfway back, as you cross a small clearing, you hear it. The whistle of incoming artillery. The sound is distinctive, unmistakable. A rising shriek that makes your bowels turn to liquid. Morrison screams, "Down!" and everyone drops flat, face first, into the frozen earth. The shells impact 200 yards to your right, impossibly loud, concussive waves that punch the air from your lungs. Geysers of earth erupt skyward, black and brown against the gray sky. 4 shells, 5, 6. The ground trembles beneath you, bucking like something alive. You press your face into the frozen earth, hands clamped over your helmet, making yourself as small as possible. Shrapnel whines through the air overhead. A sound like angry hornets magnified 1,000 times. Hot metal fragments slash through branches, thud into tree trunks. The barrage lasts 30 seconds, though it feels like hours. When the explosions stop, Morrison is on his feet instantly, his voice cutting through the ringing in your ears. Move, move. Artillery observers sometimes use an initial barrage to pin troops in place, then adjust fire to walk the shells onto the target. Every second you stay here is a second closer to death. You run, crouched low, as fast as you dare across uneven ground. Behind you, another salvo falls, closer this time, close enough that the pressure wave hits you like a physical blow. Dirt and debris rain down, pattering against your helmet like hail. But you make it to the tree line, relative safety, lungs burning, heart hammering so hard you can feel it in your throat. The patrol reaches your lines at 16:20 hours. You are shaking, partly from cold, partly from adrenaline. Morrison reports to the platoon leader, Lieutenant Davis, while you, Rodriguez, and Jenkins return to your positions. Jenkins looks pale, his eyes wide. His first time under artillery. Rodriguez claps him on the shoulder. "You did good," he says, which is not true, but is kind. Back at your foxhole, you strip off your damp gloves and rub your hands together, trying to restore feeling. Your fingers are white, almost bloodless. You chafe them vigorously, wincing at the pins and needles sensation as circulation returns. In the Pacific, you would be worried about different hazards: heat exhaustion, dehydration, jungle rot. Here in Europe, the cold is the enemy as much as the Germans. Evening approaches. The sky is beginning to darken, gray clouds heavy with the promise of snow. The temperature continues to drop. You pull on a wool sweater over your field jacket, then wrap yourself in your blanket. Still cold. Always cold. Evening, 6 p.m., 8 p.m. Dinner is another K-ration, the supper unit marked with a blue stripe. It contains a can of beef and pork loaf crackers, a chocolate D-ration bar, bouillon cubes, cigarettes, and matches. The beef and pork loaf is universally despised, a gray-pink mass that tastes vaguely of meat and vaguely of nothing. You eat it anyway, mechanically, because your body needs fuel. The D-ration chocolate is better, though it is formulated to be hard enough that it will not melt in tropical heat, which also makes it hard enough to chip teeth. You suck on it slowly, letting it dissolve gradually. After eating, you conduct evening stand-to, the mirror image of the morning ritual. Everyone mans their positions as darkness falls, watching for enemy activity. The period just after sunset is another vulnerable time, when diminishing light makes observation difficult, and enemy forces might probe the lines under cover of dusk. Tonight, nothing happens. The minutes tick by, and the world grows dark. At 1930 hours, stand-to ends. You settle into your foxhole for the night. Williams is back, having spent the afternoon on a working party. He looks exhausted, his face lined with dirt. He does not speak, just drops into the foxhole and closes his eyes. You arrange your equipment carefully. Your rifle goes on the parapet, within easy reach. Your helmet becomes a pillow, though it is a hard and uncomfortable one. You wrap yourself in your blanket and try to get comfortable, which is impossible. The foxhole is too narrow, too shallow. No position feels good. Your hip digs into the ground. Your shoulder aches, but you are so tired that eventually, despite the discomfort, sleep finds you. Night, 8 p.m., 12 a.m. You wake sometime after 8, though you cannot see your watch in the darkness. Williams is shaking you. Your turn, he mumbles. Guard duty. 2 hours on, 2 hours off, rotating through the night. You pull yourself upright, every muscle protesting. Your back hurts, your legs are stiff, and you are so cold that your jaw aches from clenching your teeth. You fumble for your rifle in the darkness, checking by touch that a round is chambered. Williams passes you without a word, curling up in the space you just vacated. Within minutes, his breathing slows to the rhythm of sleep. Night guard duty is the worst duty. You sit in absolute darkness, staring at nothing, listening to every sound. The night is full of noises. Wind rustling through dead leaves, branches creaking, small animals moving through the underbrush. Every sound might be an approaching enemy soldier. Your imagination runs wild, conjuring shapes from shadows, hearing footsteps in every rustle. Occasionally, flares go up somewhere along the line. Brilliant magnesium stars that float slowly down on miniature parachutes, casting the landscape in harsh white light. The flares create sharp shadows, turning familiar terrain alien and threatening. When the flares die, The darkness seems even deeper than before. You hear artillery in the distance, a rolling thunder that never quite stops. Sometimes it is American artillery, firing on German positions. Sometimes it is German artillery, falling on American positions miles away. The sound is constant, the background noise of war. You have learned to estimate distance by sound. Anything within a mile makes the ground tremble. Beyond that, you feel nothing. Just hear the distant crump of explosions. Time passes with agonizing slowness. You check your watch repeatedly, holding it close to your face to read the luminous hands. 8:30, 8:45, 9 o'clock. Each 15-minute interval feels like an hour. You try various tricks to stay alert, counting to 100, then starting over, running through the alphabet backward, mentally walking through your childhood home, room by room, remembering every detail. Around 9:30, you hear movement on your right. You tense, finger on the trigger guard of your rifle. "Sergeant Morrison," comes a whisper. You relax. Morrison is making his rounds, checking each position, making sure everyone is awake and alert. He appears out of the darkness like a ghost, crouches beside your foxhole for a moment. "Everything quiet?" he whispered. "Yes, Sergeant." "Stay sharp. Intelligence says the Germans have been active tonight, probing lines to the south. They might try something here." "Yes, Sergeant." He moves on, disappearing into the night. You are suddenly much more awake, adrenaline surging. The next half hour passes in heightened awareness, every sense straining. But nothing happens, no attack materializes. At 10 o'clock, you wake Williams for his turn. He groans, but pulls himself upright without complaint. You trade places, and you are asleep within seconds. Late night, 12 a.m., 4 a.m. The night passes in fragments. You wake for guard duty again at midnight. Stand your watch until 2, then sleep until 4. Each rotation is the same. Cold, dark, tense. Each sleep period is the same. Inadequate, uncomfortable, filled with half dreams of home. During your midnight watch, it begins to snow. Small flakes at first, barely visible in the darkness, then heavier. Snow accumulates on your helmet, on your shoulders, on the rim of the foxhole. It is beautiful in a way, peaceful, until you remember that snow means even more cold, even more wet. By morning, your foxhole will have several inches of snow in the bottom, which will turn to water when the sun comes up, which will soak everything. Around 1 o'clock, you hear a sound that makes your blood run cold. The distinctive burp of a German MG-42 machine gun somewhere to your left. Short bursts, 6 or 7 rounds at a time. Then silence. Then the deeper thump, thump, thump of an American .30 caliber Browning machine gun answering. A firefight, but not here, perhaps 300 yards away. You grip your rifle and watch your sector, heart pounding. The firing continues sporadically for 10 minutes, then stops. No word comes down about what happened. At 2 o'clock, Williams takes over and you sleep again. This time your sleep is troubled, filled with anxious dreams. You dream you are home, walking down your street, but the houses are all wrong, distorted. You dream you are in combat, firing your rifle, but no sound comes out. You dream you are running, and your legs will not work properly, moving through thick mud. You wake gasping just before 4, disoriented and sweating despite the cold. This time, Williams does not need to wake you. You are already awake when the first hints of dawn begin to lighten the eastern sky. Another day is beginning. Time for stand to for breakfast, for another day of waiting and working and watching. The cycle continues. The broader context, equipment and gear. To understand a day in the life of a World War II soldier, we must understand what he carried. The infantryman's load was substantial, carefully designed, but still punishing. Let us examine piece by piece the equipment that defined the soldier's existence. The M1 Garand rifle was the centerpiece. Weighing 9.5 pounds empty, it was substantially heavier than earlier rifles, but the semi-automatic action justified the weight. The rifle fired a powerful .30-06 cartridge, effective out to 500 yards or more. The unblocked clip system, while not perfect, allowed rapid reloading under stress. A skilled soldier could swap in a fresh clip in under 2 seconds. The rifle's distinctive ping, when the clip ejected, became one of the defining sounds of the war. General Patton was not exaggerating when he called it the finest implement of war. American infantry had a significant firepower advantage over enemies armed with bolt-action rifles. In a close-range firefight, this advantage was decisive. But the rifle was just the beginning. The soldier also carried a steel helmet, the M1, weighing about 2.5 pounds. This consisted of a steel shell over a fiber liner with a leather suspension system. The helmet could stop shrapnel and sometimes pistol rounds, but rifle bullets went straight through. Still, it saved countless lives. Soldiers personalized their helmets, writing names or slogans, tucking photographs into the liner, covering them with camouflage netting or burlap. A web belt, the M1936, made of canvas webbing with a brass buckle. From this belt hung a canteen in a canvas cover holding 1 quart of water. In hot climates, soldiers often carried 2 or even 3 canteens. Dehydration was a constant concern, especially in the Pacific. A first aid pouch containing gauze, bandages, sulfa powder to prevent infection, and morphine syrettes for pain. The morphine came in small tubes with an attached needle. You bit off the protective cap, jabbed the needle into muscle, and squeezed. The packaging instructed you to attach the empty syrette to the casualty's collar so medics would know he had received morphine. An ammunition pouch, or rather 2 pouches, 1 on each hip, each holding 2 clips of ammunition for the M1 Garand. Some soldiers also carried cloth bandoliers, strips of canvas with pockets for 6 clips draped across the chest. An entrenching tool in a canvas carrier, the folding shovel that every soldier learned to hate and depend upon. The blade could be locked at a 90-degree angle to work as a pick, or extended straight for shoveling. In a pinch, it also worked as a weapon. More than one soldier used his entrenching tool in desperate close-quarters combat, a bayonet in a scabbard. The M1 bayonet was a 10-inch blade with a wooden or plastic grip. By World War II, bayonets were rarely used in combat. Modern firepower made bayonet charges suicidal. But they were useful tools for opening cans, digging, cutting, and 100 other camp chores. A gas mask in a canvas bag, though by 1904, gas warfare seemed unlikely. Soldiers often discarded their gas masks to reduce weight. Despite regulations, requiring them to keep the masks at all times. On the soldier's back was a pack, the M1928 haversack, a canvas bag holding personal items and extra equipment, spare socks, a shelter, half of a two-man tent, a blanket, a poncho or raincoat, toilet articles, writing paper and pen, a sewing kit called a housewife, perhaps a book or magazine, personal photographs, letters from home, and various small items that made life bearable. Suspended from the pack, or carried separately, was a bedroll, sometimes called a horse collar roll because of the way it wrapped around the pack. This consisted of a blanket or two, a shelter half, and whatever spare clothing the soldier had. Finally, there was food. Soldiers carried several days' worth of rations, either K-rations or C-rations. K-rations were lighter but less substantial. C-rations were heavier but more filling. Most soldiers carried a mix. Add it all up, and the infantrymen carried between 60 and 70 pounds of equipment, sometimes more. In hot weather, this was punishing. Soldiers learned to economize, ditching anything non-essential. Spare underwear? Gone. Extra socks? Maybe one pair. The book? Sorry, too heavy. Every ounce mattered when you were marching 20 miles a day. In some situations, soldiers carried even more. Machine gunners carried the 30-pound Browning machine gun or the even heavier Browning automatic rifle. Mortar crews carried mortar tubes, base plates, and shells. Radio operators carried bulky backpack radios weighing 30 pounds or more. Officers carried maps, compasses, binoculars, and message pads. Everyone carried whatever special equipment their role required. The load was crushing. Soldiers developed calloused shoulders where the pack straps dug in. Backs ached constantly. Feet took tremendous punishment, every step driving the weight down onto boots that were never quite adequate. Blisters were universal. Most soldiers marched with feet wrapped in tape, padding the most vulnerable spots. Rations and food. Let us examine in more detail what the soldier ate, because food, or the lack of it, dominated his thoughts. The K-ration, as mentioned, came in 3 varieties: breakfast, dinner, and supper. The breakfast unit contained ham and eggs, crackers, a fruit bar, instant coffee, sugar, cigarettes, and gum. The dinner unit contained cheese, crackers, candy or dextrose tablets, lemon juice powder, sugar, cigarettes, and gum. The supper unit contained meat, various types, crackers, a D-ration chocolate bar, bouillon cubes, cigarettes, and toilet paper. Each unit was packed in a rectangular box about 4 inches by 3 inches by 2 inches, wax-coated to resist water. The boxes were color-coded: brown for breakfast, white for dinner, blue for supper, though the color coding was not introduced until late 1944. The complete K-ration for one day, 3 boxes, weighed about 2¼ pounds and provided approximately 2,800 calories, considerably less than the 3,000 to 4,000 calories that soldiers performing hard labor actually needed. The K-ration was designed by Ansel Keys, a physiologist at the University of Minnesota in 1941. He was tasked with creating a non-perishable, ready-to-eat ration that could fit in a soldier's pocket. Keys went to a local grocery store with a budget of about 30 cents per ration and assembled a prototype using off-the-shelf items. hard biscuits, dry sausage chocolate, and hard candy. After field testing, the Army ordered 1 million rations in 1942. Production eventually reached over 100 million units. Soldiers had mixed feelings about K-rations. On the positive side, they were lightweight, compact, and required no preparation. You could eat them on the move in a foxhole in complete darkness. They did not spoil, even in extreme heat. On the negative side, they were monotonous. The portions were small, and some components were simply unpalatable. The meat products in particular drew complaints. Soldiers referred to the ham and eggs as ham and motherless children, a polite version of the actual slang. The cheese was dense and flavorless. The crackers could chip teeth. The C ration was the alternative, and most soldiers preferred it. C rations came in cans rather than boxes. 6 12-ounce cans comprising one full ration. 3 cans contained the main course: meat and beans, meat and vegetable stew, meat and potato hash, or spaghetti in meat sauce. 3 cans contained bread products, dessert, and accessories: crackers, instant coffee, sugar, cigarettes, toilet paper, and sometimes candy. C rations were heavier than K rations, about 4.5 pounds for a full day's ration, but they contained more food, about 3,400 calories. The cans were cylindrical, about 3 inches in diameter and 4 inches tall, with a key soldered to the bottom for opening. The key peeled back a strip of metal around the lid in a spiral, a process that required patience and often cut your fingers. The main course cans were meant to be heated, and hot food improved morale significantly. Soldiers devised ingenious methods for heating rations. The most common was the buddy burner, a cut-down ration can filled with dirt soaked in gasoline. The gasoline burned hot and relatively smokeless, heating a can of food in 5 to 10 minutes. Other soldiers used tablet-form heat fuel called trioxane, though this was not always available. The C ration remained essentially unchanged from early in the war until it was phased out in the late 1950s, replaced eventually by the modern MRE. Soldiers in Korea and even Vietnam sometimes ate World War II vintage C rations. The cans rusted, but the contents still edible after a decade or more. Beyond K rations and C rations, there were other options, though frontline soldiers rarely saw them. A rations were fresh food, served in garrison or rear areas. Soldiers training stateside ate A rations: eggs, bacon, fresh bread, milk, vegetables. These were memories by the time you reached the front. B rations were preserved but unprepared food, cooked by field kitchens and served hot when conditions allowed. A field kitchen was a mobile operation, usually set up a mile or more behind the lines. Cooks worked with portable stoves, large pots, and whatever ingredients were available. The food was plain: stews, beans, hash, but it was hot and plentiful. When your unit rotated out of the line for rest, hot meals from a field kitchen were one of the first pleasures. D rations were emergency chocolate bars, formulated to provide high calories in a small package. The chocolate was fortified with vitamins and minerals, but it was also deliberately made less palatable than normal chocolate, so soldiers would not eat it except in emergencies. It worked, perhaps too well. The D ration was notorious for being nearly inedible, hard as a rock, and tasting vaguely of wax. Whatever the ration, soldiers customized their meals when possible. Trading was constant. Someone who hated the ham and eggs would trade for cheese. Someone who did not smoke would trade cigarettes for extra crackers or candy. Some soldiers hoarded certain items, creating stockpiles of chocolate or sugar or sour coffee. To our theater differences, Europe versus Pacific. A day in the life of a soldier varied dramatically depending on where he served. The European theater and the Pacific theater presented vastly different challenges. In Europe, the primary enemy was Germany, a modern, industrialized nation with an experienced, well-equipped military. German soldiers were well-trained and often fought with fanatical determination, especially as the war dragged on and they defended their own soil. The terrain varied from the bocage hedgerows of Normandy, dense, ancient banks of earth, and vegetation that made every field a small fortress, to the winter forests of the Ardennes, to the rubble-choked streets of German cities. The climate in Europe was temperate but harsh. The winter of 1944 to 1945 was brutal. Temperatures regularly dropped below freezing. Snow was frequent. Soldiers suffered from cold injuries on a massive scale. Trench foot became epidemic in some units. The 1st Battalion of 1 Division reported men whose feet were so swollen from trench foot that they had to be carried to their foxholes because they could not walk. Proper footwear was in desperately short supply. The Army had miscalculated the sizes needed, basing orders on World War I data, not accounting for the larger size of modern soldiers. Supplies of larger boots did not arrive until February 1945, too late to prevent thousands of cold weather casualties. Beyond the cold, the mud was almost as bad. Autumn and spring brought rain, turning the ground into a morass. Vehicles bogged down. Supply lines ground to a halt. Soldiers slogged through knee-deep mud that sucked boots off feet. Foxholes filled with water. Everything was damp, moldy, rotting. Combat in Europe was often urban or semi-urban. The German defensive strategy involved turning every building into a strong point, every street into a killing zone. Clearing a single city block could take days and cost dozens of casualties. House-to-house fighting was intimate and brutal. You kicked down doors, threw grenades into cellars, shot at shadows. Civilian casualties were inevitable and traumatic. The Pacific Theater presented entirely different challenges. The primary enemy was Japan, an empire defending territory it had conquered. Japanese soldiers fought with a different mentality, often refusing to surrender even when defeat was certain. Banzai charges, suicidal mass attacks were common. Japanese soldiers who were wounded or cornered frequently killed themselves rather than be captured. This made the war in the Pacific particularly brutal and unforgiving. The terrain was hostile in ways Europe was not. Jungles covered with vegetation so thick you could barely see 10 feet. Mountains so steep you had to climb using roots and vines, swamps filled with leeches and crocodiles. Islands so remote that supply was a constant crisis. The climate was the inverse of Europe, hot, humid, oppressive. Temperatures often exceeded 100 degrees. Humidity was near 100%. You sweated constantly, soaking through uniforms in minutes. Dehydration was a lethal threat. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke felled soldiers regularly. On some islands, more casualties came from environmental factors than from enemy action. Disease was rampant in the Pacific. Malaria, carried by mosquitoes, was endemic on many islands. The Anopheles mosquito, which carries the malaria parasite, bred in any standing water. Soldiers took anti-malarial drugs daily, but the drugs were not always effective. Guadalcanal saw malaria rates approach 50%. Other diseases were equally dangerous. Dengue fever, typhus, dysentery, scrub typhus, jungle rot. Jungle rot was a catch-all term for various skin infections that thrived in hot, humid conditions. Small cuts or abrasions would become infected almost immediately. Fungal infections were constant. Your feet, your groin, your armpits, anywhere that stayed damp, would develop angry red rashes. Untreated, these could become serious medical problems. The terrain in the Pacific also meant that mechanization was often impossible. Jeeps, trucks, and tanks could not navigate jungle trails or muddy slopes. Everything went forward on the backs of soldiers, or, when available, mules. Ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, all carried by hand, mile after mile through jungle or over mountains. It was exhausting, back-breaking work. Combat in the Pacific was also different in character. Battles were often for small objectives, a ridge, a hill, an airfield. But these objectives were defended with incredible tenacity. Japanese soldiers dug elaborate cave systems and bunkers, interconnected and mutually supporting. Attacking such positions required flamethrowers, satchel charges, and close quarters fighting. Progress was measured in yards. A successful day might see your unit advance 200 yards at the cost of a dozen casualties. The isolation in the Pacific was profound. In Europe, even at the front, you were rarely more than a few days from a major city, from civilization. Supply lines were relatively short. In the Pacific, you might be on an island thousands of miles from anywhere, reachable only by ship or aircraft. If the supply line broke, you were in serious trouble. Yet despite these differences, the fundamental experience was similar. Whether in a foxhole in Belgium or a foxhole on Okinawa, whether facing Germans or Japanese, whether cold or hot, the infantryman's day was defined by the same elements, tedium punctuated by terror, hard physical labor, inadequate food and sleep, and the constant presence of danger and death. The human element, coping and survival. How did soldiers endure? What kept them going through days and weeks and months of this existence? The answer is complex, but research into military psychology and countless veteran testimonies point to certain factors. First, and perhaps most important, was unit cohesion, the bonds between soldiers. Historical studies of combat motivation consistently demonstrate that soldiers fought primarily for their immediate comrades rather than for abstract ideals. Your squad was your family, the men you depended on for survival. You shared everything with them: food, shelter, danger. You learned their quirks, their fears, their stories. When combat came, evidence from post-war interviews suggests that soldiers fought not for abstract ideals or even for their country, but for the men beside you. You fought because they depended on you and you could not let them down. This bond was forged in shared hardship. Sociological research on group formation under stress indicates that suffering together creates loyalty, stronger than many other social connections. Replacements were initially outsiders, not yet part of this brotherhood. Veterans treated them with distance. Oral histories suggest this was not cruelty, but wariness. The logic, while brutal, appears to have been practical. Casualty statistics from rifle companies show that many replacements did not survive their first week in combat. Learning their names, befriending them, investing emotionally, psychological evidence suggests this emotional distance served as a protective mechanism. Better to keep distance until they proved they could survive. Replacements who made it past the first few weeks gradually earned acceptance, became part of the unit. Leadership mattered enormously. A good sergeant or lieutenant could make unbearable conditions bearable. They knew when to push and when to ease off, when to enforce regulations and when to bend rules. They led by example, sharing the same hardships as their men. When artillery fell, they dug in beside you. When rations were short, they ate last. This kind of leadership earned absolute loyalty. Conversely, poor leadership could destroy morale. Officers who stayed safely in the rear while ordering their men into danger were despised. Junior officers had frighteningly high casualty rates because they were expected to lead from the front, to be the first over the top, the first through the door. Those who shirked this duty were sometimes fragged, deliberately killed by their own men. This was rare, but it happened. Mail from home was vital for morale. Letters were the connection to the world beyond the war, reminders that normalcy still existed somewhere. Soldiers read and reread letters until the paper fell apart. Photographs from home were treasured, carried everywhere, shown to anyone who would look. The Army recognized this and made mail delivery a priority. Elaborate systems got letters from the United States to the front lines, sometimes in as little as a week. Though 3 to 4 weeks was more typical, religion provided comfort to many, though not all. Chaplains accompanied units into combat, holding services when possible, counseling men who needed to talk, administering last rites to the dying. Foxhole conversions were common. Men who had never prayed found themselves bargaining with God when shells fell. Humor was another coping mechanism. Soldiers joked about everything: the food, the officers, the enemy, death itself. The jokes were often dark, sometimes shocking to outsiders, but they served a purpose. Laughter broke tension, created distance from fear. A soldier who could joke about death had power over it, however illusory, some soldiers wrote. Diaries were officially forbidden. They might contain information useful to the enemy if captured, but many soldiers kept them anyway. Writing helped process the experience, made sense of chaos. Others drew, sketching the landscape, their friends, scenes of combat. These creative outlets provided mental escape. Many soldiers simply endured. They developed a fatalism, an acceptance that death might come at any moment, and there was nothing you could do about it. This fatalism was paradoxically liberating. If you might die anyway, there was no point worrying about it. You did your job, followed orders, and hoped for the best. Of course, not everyone coped successfully. Battle fatigue, what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, affected many soldiers. The symptoms varied: inability to sleep, uncontrollable shaking, paranoia, emotional numbness, violent outbursts. In severe cases, men simply broke down, unable to function. The Army's understanding of psychological trauma was limited. Some commanders treated battle fatigue as cowardice, threatening courts-martial. More enlightened officers recognized it as a medical condition requiring treatment. Units that saw prolonged combat without relief had epidemic rates of battle fatigue. The 90-division gamble. The Army's decision to limit the number of divisions while maximizing their fighting strength meant soldiers stayed in combat much longer than in previous wars. There was no rotation policy. You fought until you were killed, wounded badly enough to be evacuated, or the war ended. Surveys of combat soldiers consistently identified lack of rotation as their #1 complaint. Towards the end of the war, as victory became inevitable, a new fear emerged, dying so close to the end. Soldiers who had survived months or years of combat became increasingly cautious, unwilling to take risks when peace seemed imminent. This was completely understandable, but it sometimes affected combat effectiveness. The weight of ordinary days. The sun is setting now on this long day we have walked through together. 24 hours in the life of a World War II soldier. We have followed this young man through the pre-dawn stand-to, the morning's labor, the afternoon patrol, the evening settling in, and the long night watch. We have examined his equipment, his food, his surroundings. We have compared his experience in Europe and the Pacific. We have tried to understand how he coped with conditions that seem almost unimaginable to those of us who have never experienced war. But there is something we have not yet discussed, something the soldier himself probably did not fully understand as he lived through this ordinary day. Something that only becomes clear when we step back and look at the broader picture. Here is what the historical evidence suggests about this unremarkable day we just experienced. Statistically speaking, the soldier we followed should not have survived it. Let us examine what we know from military records. In a typical rifle company engaged in sustained combat operations during the European campaign, daily casualties from all causes, combat, disease, accidents, psychological breakdown, averaged between 2 and 4%. This might sound small, but the mathematics are unforgiving. Over 30 days, a soldier faced roughly a 50-50 chance of becoming a casualty. Over 90 days, the odds suggested that fewer than 1 in 10 would emerge unscathed. Some rifle companies recorded casualty rates exceeding 600% when replacements were factored in, meaning the unit was effectively destroyed and rebuilt 6 times over. The day we just walked through was, by design, unremarkable. No major battle occurred. No dramatic heroics were required. It was simply a day of routine. Guard duty, working parties, a patrol, the endless watching and waiting. Yet based on what military historians understand about casualty patterns, even on days like this, the soldier faced measurable risk. The patrol alone, moving through potentially hostile territory, carried substantial danger. The artillery barrage that caught the patrol was not unusual. It was typical. On any given day, somewhere along the line, shells would fall. Someone would be hit. The soldier we followed was not hit. He survived the day. This could imply multiple factors at work: skill, experience, good leadership from Sergeant Morrison, simple geographic luck. His unit happening to be in a relatively quiet sector that day. But military historians examining casualty data have noted that beyond all these factors, survival often came down to randomness. As historian Paul Fussell, himself a combat infantryman, observed in his writings, there was no technique or care or attitude that could reliably protect a soldier. You were simply lucky, or you were not. The shell hit someone else, or it hit you. Now consider this. The day we just experienced was not an exception. It was typical. For every day of dramatic battle that appears in history books, there were dozens, sometimes hundreds of days like this. Days of routine, days of endurance, days of simply being there, hour after hour, watching and waiting and hoping. This suggests something profound about the nature of combat service in World War II. The great challenge was not necessarily the famous battles. D-Day, the Bulge, Iwo Jima. These were terrible, certainly, and casualty rates spiked dramatically during major operations. But for most soldiers, most of the time, the challenge was accumulation. It was surviving day after day after day of this. It was facing that 2 to 4% daily risk not once, not twice, but continuously for weeks or months. It was the grinding mathematical reality that your luck would eventually run out. The evidence from unit records indicates that very few soldiers who entered combat with a rifle company at the beginning of a campaign were still serving with that same unit, unwounded, at the campaign's end. Replacements were constant. The familiar faces changed. The men who survived did so based on available evidence, through some combination of skill, caution, and statistical anomaly. So when we say the day we just experienced was ordinary, we must understand what that really meant. For the soldier living through it, yes, it felt ordinary. It was simply another day. But from a historical perspective, informed by casualty statistics and unit records, each ordinary day survived was actually extraordinary. Each sunrise marked another small victory against probability. Each sunset meant the soldier had beaten the odds one more time. The soldier we followed today is a composite drawn from thousands of first-hand accounts, diaries, letters, and official military records. But he represents real men who lived through real days exactly like this. Based on demographic studies, roughly 137,186 American infantrymen were killed in action or died of wounds between 1941 and 1946. Another several hundred thousand were wounded. The vast majority of these casualties occurred not in single dramatic moments, but across countless ordinary days. Days of patrols and working parties, days of standing watch and digging trenches, days that looked and felt exactly like the day we just walked through. Those who survived, and most did survive, though not all, often struggled to articulate what they had endured. How do you explain to someone who was not there that the hardest part was not necessarily the combat itself, but the daily grind of existence? How do you convey what it meant to face that statistical reality day after day, knowing that each morning might be your last, yet having to go on anyway? Many veterans simply did not talk about it. They came home, took off their uniforms, and tried to resume their lives. The war became something private, a closed chapter. From a psychological perspective, and research on trauma and coping mechanisms would suggest this interpretation, silence may have served as a protective mechanism To speak about it was to relive it, better to seal it away, to move forward, to focus on the life that came after. But silence has a cost. Recent efforts to record oral histories before the World War II generation passes entirely into history have revealed patterns in how veterans remember their service. They remember small details with crystalline clarity: the taste of K-rations, the weight of wet boots, the face of a sergeant, the sound of a particular song. The big battles blur together. But the ordinary days, the days like the one we just experienced, remain vivid. This could indicate that it was these days, not the dramatic moments, that truly shaped their experience. The soldier we followed today is part of what is often called the greatest generation. The term, popularized by journalist Tom Brokaw, refers to the generation that came of age during the Depression and went on to fight World War II. The veterans themselves often rejected this label. They did not think they were doing anything special. They were doing what needed to be done, what circumstances demanded of them. This humility, based on accounts from veterans themselves, appears genuine. Yet here is what the historical record reveals. By enduring days like the one we just experienced, by surviving the accumulation of ordinary danger, by maintaining their humanity in conditions designed to destroy it, they achieved something remarkable. Not through heroics, though there were heroes, but through simple persistence, through showing up day after day and doing their duty despite fear, despite cold, despite hunger, despite every rational reason to give up. As we close this day, as our soldier settles into his foxhole for another cold night, we might reflect on what this means. We live in a world shaped by the outcome of World War II. The international order, the alliances, the prosperity that many of us enjoy. All of this rests on the foundation built by men who survived days like the one we just experienced. Not just the generals in the famous battles, but the accumulation of 1 million ordinary days lived by ordinary soldiers. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, in your warm bed, in your safe home, perhaps spare a thought for the young man in the foxhole. Think about his cold, his hunger, his fear. Think about the fact that he probably had no idea, as he lived through this unremarkable day, that he was beating odds that should have broken him. Think about the millions like him, who endured day after day after day, who carried the weight of ordinary danger for months or years, so that future generations might never have to. The remarkable thing about this soldier, the thing that should fill us with awe when we truly understand it, is not that he did anything dramatic on this particular day. The remarkable thing is that he lived through it, and then he woke up the next morning and did it all again. That is courage, that is endurance, that is what deserves to be remembered. If you found this journey meaningful, consider subscribing to Sleepable History. There are many more stories to tell, many more lives to explore, many more ordinary days that reveal extraordinary truths. Until next time, rest well and remember, sometimes the most remarkable acts are the ones that look, from the outside, completely unremarkable.